Yesterday, I don't know exactly how I want to characterize the fellow who called, but he calls with some regularity from Virginia, and I think I'm guessing that he's somebody who does this for a living. But anyhow, he called up and he said, do you really want to raise the minimum wage? Because then your McDonald's hamburger is going to cost more. And we got in this big debate about the minimum wage. And I just completely neglected to even mention the fact that the hamburger wouldn't have to cost a penny more if McDonald's made a little less profit. Their corporate profits, not just theirs, but corporate profits in general, are at the highest level in the history of the republic. Or if their CEOs and senior executives took a little less money, those salaries are at the highest level in the history of the republic. They could easily pay their workers a little more. But anyhow, we got into the impact, the supposed inflationary impact of the minimum wage. And I said, please identify for me any 1 year since 1939 when the minimum wage was passed, or 38 when it was passed, when raising the minimum wage produced inflation. And he was unable to do that. And James did some math on this, and some very interesting stuff here. He said the minimum wage has been increased 22 times since 1939. Republicans have increased it 8 times. Democrats have increased it 14 times. The average percentage increase was 16.2%, which did not produce inflation. And if you look at it in decade-long chunks, and the president is proposing not raising the minimum wage tomorrow morning. He's proposing, phasing it in over several years. So if you look at it in decade-long chunks, what you see is that the decade of the 40s, there was 150% increase in the minimum wage. No significant inflation as a consequence of that. In the decade of the 50s, it was a 53% increase in the minimum wage. Again, didn't jack up prices. To the extent that there was inflation all through these times, it was very purposeful reduction in the value of the dollar, largely by the Fed, in order for the government to be able to pay off its debts with cheaper dollars. Very simple stuff. Had nothing to do with the minimum wage. The decade of the 60s, it was 39% increase in the minimum wage. The decade of the 70s, a 93% increase in the minimum wage. The decade of the 80s, which was Bush and Reagan, it was only a 22% increase in the minimum wage. In fact, one of the periods of time when the minimum wage really didn't go up much at all. And inflation was quite significant during that period of time, oddly enough. The decade of the 90s, 35% increase in the minimum wage, and the first decade of the 21st century, a 40% increase in the minimum wage. None of those have produced inflation. In fact, the average decade-long increase has been 62%. Now, if you were to raise today's minimum wage by 62%, it would be $11.76 an hour, which is in the neighborhood of the $9 an hour that Obama is proposing, or the $10 an hour that Bernie Sanders and others are proposing. $10.50 an hour is where it would be if it was just inflation adjusted to 1968. So, once again, we need to raise the minimum wage, and there will be no negative fallout from it.